The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for all joining us for our webinar today on the new state bond program. My name is Michelle Lowe. I am the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for CCSA on our Government Affairs team. Also from CCSA today, we have Nick Watson and Carson Eves. Nick is our Senior Facilities Advisor, and Carson is our Manager of Government Affairs. The panelists that we have for you today, outside of CCSA, are two of our experts on the bond program, Lisa Olakoya and William Savage. They will both be presenting on the past bond program and on the future bond program as well, to give you a little bit more information about the historic program and how it's been run, and then also potential changes for the new state bond. So with that, I'm going to first turn it over to Nick Watson to tell you a little bit more about the interplay between state bonds and the local bonds.
Thank you, Michelle, and thanks everybody who's joining the webinar today. We're really excited to have Lisa and Bill here to talk about the state bond program and how our charter schools can potentially access the funding available through Prop 51 that passed recently. Equitable funding under state and local bond programs is a big priority for CCSA, and we're fortunate that we've been able to work with charter communities and school districts around the state, and increasingly we're finding out that we can be successful in having school district local bond measures also have funding available for charter schools. And so, in the southern part of the state, San Diego Unified and Los Angeles Unified, to name a couple of examples. The northern part of the state, Natomas Unified and Chico Unified, and then in the Bay Area, Eastside Union, Redwood City are two districts that recently passed bond measures. All of those districts I mentioned have set aside some funding amounts for charter schools. As we'll talk about in more detail later, the state bond program typically provides 50% of a project cost in a grant. We think that for schools that are located in those districts that have local bond money available as well, provides a great opportunity to have kind of a 50-50 setup where you can access or pay for half your project with state funds, half with local funds. CCSA's regional advocacy and facilities teams will be working in the coming months with charter operators and school districts that have local bond funding available in an effort to maximize the ability for charters to access both programs. We've already had some preliminary discussions in San Diego. I know that we'll be doing the same in other parts of the state. So definitely keep on the lookout for communications from us around that. And also feel free to reach out to us in the coming weeks and months with questions or ideas on how your school can potentially become involved in these programs. So again, thank you for everyone for attending today. I think at this point I'll turn it over to Lisa to start the presentation.
Hi, this is Lisa Olakoya, and I do want to inform you first that this is the fourth opportunity that a statewide school construction bond has set aside money just for charter school use. And in this one, as you probably know, there is a total amount of $500 million allocated for charter schools. The bit of difference in how this program runs between charters and school districts is that districts typically have the opportunity to begin their projects up front and locate, purchase, and get approval on a site, prepare plans, have them approved by DSA, and then come into the Office of Public School Construction to file for funding for the project. Understanding that typically charter schools don't have the resources to do all of this and fund it before they can come in for money, this program runs a little bit differently. It is typically a reservation of funds. Schools will go through an application process, and then if they make the cut, meaning if the program is oversubscribed, there will be a method I'll discuss about how to distribute the money equitably. Then they get an opportunity to begin the process with the drawing down of those reservation of funds. So they don't have to come out of pocket up front so much. At any rate, a bit of what this program is, the Charter School Facility Program is, as Nicholas mentioned, a 50% grant program. And then the other 50% is a match that's done either through school contribution, perhaps from those local bonds they spoke of, and the state will give you an opportunity through the Treasurer's Office for a low-interest loan for the balance over a 30-year period, and this is handled through the California School Finance Authority. Next. What this program offers is an opportunity for schools to actually build a school from scratch, as they say, including site acquisition funding, funding for construction, or the opportunity to do rehabilitation of existing district facilities, meaning that if a school is operating or wishes to operate on a district, they can work with the district to rehabilitate buildings that are on the site that are 15 years old at least, and even perhaps add some new buildings to have enough to meet their program needs, and they can still participate in this program in that way. So the site acquisition is pretty much 50% of the cost of the site. The new construction is basically a pupil grant based on the number of students. And then the rehabilitation of existing facilities is a dollar amount per square foot. I'll discuss that a little bit more in a minute. Next. So the basic requirement is that the school have an existing charter. To apply for the program, one has to have been operating for at least 2 years, or the administration of the school must have had experience of at least 2 years administering over a charter school, even if it's not the one for which they're applying. The charter must be in good standing, and there must be a determination of financial soundness by the California School Finance Authority. This is basically to ensure that the school can handle the debt service in paying back the loan amount that they might be applying for the other 50% of this project. Next. So this is kind of how it works, the funding structure. As I mentioned, in buying land to build new buildings on for a new school, you get either the actual cost or an appraisal, the lower of the two, at, again, the 50%. If at the time of applying, the school doesn't have a site picked out, which is very common, there is a method in the application process that allows you just to provide an estimate of the approximate value of land in your area. From that point, as I said, it's basically a pupil grant for new construction. There are values based on grade levels, and those are set in the regulations and updated each year as the construction cost goes up. There are also additional categories in new construction. There are amounts that will allow for site development, and this is pretty much like the site. It's an actual cost or an estimate at 50% for things like general site, utilities, etc. There are also additional funding opportunities if the district is in a dense urban area and has an impacted site. There are some basic requirements to meet the additional funding for that. There is also multi-story construction, additional funding, and then one called geographical factor. That's typically where schools operate in areas that are geographically challenged in terms of getting materials to the area, getting bidders to bid in that particular area because they're not in an area where a lot of these contractors operate, and there's a bump to the basic pupil grant to allow for that. Next. With this program, because you are using public funds, there is a state level oversight. Typically, when charters do construction or renovation, if they're not using state bond funds, they do, by ed code requirement, only have to go through the local planning department. If you're using these bond funds, you do need to go to the state architect. Could we advance the next slide, please? For the review of the plans, you also have to have the CDE site and plan review and approval to ensure that it meets Title V requirements. In addition, the Department of Toxic Substances Control must review and approve the soil study to determine that the site is actually free of contaminants. And then, of course, in using the state bond funds, there is the requirement to meet basic labor compliance to ensure that you're paying prevailing wages and such. These do add some bureaucratic levels of review, but they, one, ensure that the funds are being used properly, and two, help with oversight to be sure that you are going to have a school that meets your needs and is safe for staff and students. Next slide. In statute and in regulation, there is a requirement that the money be distributed equitably around the state. The basic criteria involve distribution by geographical region, by population density of the area, the size of the school, and the grade levels that the school will serve. They break it down between elementary, middle, and high school. In addition, there are priority points that one can apply for. Next slide. That include whether or not the school is a nonprofit, the percentage of students classified under free or reduced lunch, priority points for rehabilitation of existing district facilities, and in terms of unhoused district pupils that are determined being housed in the project. Now, these come into play if the funds available are oversubscribed, meaning if there are qualified applicants for more than the $500 million set aside in the bond funds. Historically, they've always been oversubscribed, so these have always come into play in the previous bonds. Next slide. So how it works is that the application process, which will be typically established in a period not yet determined by the State Allocation Board, who oversees these funds, in the Office of Public School Construction, who administers them. Sometime, hopefully, this coming year, it will be announced and will provide an opportunity, typically for a period of a couple of months, for schools to put together their application and submit it to the Office of Public School Construction. It's a pretty extensive process in getting things together. They have on their website at the Office of Public School Construction the preliminary apportionment application submittal requirements still posted from the previous bond funds. We can't necessarily be sure that there won't be any changes in the application process or requirements, but historically they've pretty well stayed with what is posted on the website at this point for the last couple of bonds. Once the application period closes, the Office of Public School Construction then has the California School Finance Authority review the financial documents submitted, and they begin to put the pegs in the holes for the distribution of the funds. Once they come up with a preliminary list that complies with the requirements in statute to distribute the funds, then they prepare the list, take it back to the State Allocation Board, and the preliminary apportionments are now set aside. The funds are reserved, and the school can begin their planning and drawing these down. The funds can be drawn down in three categories: planning, site acquisition, and then for actual construction. This assists the schools with, as I said before, having the availability of some funding as they move forward, rather than waiting until everything is complete and then going to the Office of Public School Construction to get their funds reimbursed. Typically, the program, as I said, is oversubscribed, but there are many schools across the state that have been built with these funds. I think a few areas that have used them have been mentioned, and we'll find that hopefully as things move forward smoothly with support from the governor and from the State Allocation Board, we'll period. Basically, that's all I wanted to offer at this point, just to give schools an overview as to what's involved in this. And I know that Michelle will offer an opportunity for questions.
Thank you, Lisa. Yes, we will. Sorry, I failed to mention this before. We will have a question and answer time after Bill gives his presentation. I have some coming in on the chat. Please feel free to keep sending them. I'm making a list and can be the one to ask those questions. So if you come up with one, just go ahead and chat it over to me, and I will keep it on my list. With that, thank you again, Lisa, and we'll move to Bill for your presentation.
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bill Savage, and I am a school facilities consultant working in the Bay Area. I was previously the Assistant Executive Officer at the State Allocation Board in Sacramento and worked closely with charter schools and CCSA there on charter projects. And I'm also a former chair of the Coalition for Adequate School Housing. And it's really great to be here. Next slide, please. I want to talk about some of the basics for Prop 51 and also talk a little bit about the politics, then the timing and implementation of Prop 51, and also look at some opportunities for regulatory change that would assist charters, and then look ahead to how we can meet state-funded charter facilities needs in the future. So next slide, please. So Prop 51, as I'm sure everybody knows, but I'm just going to run it by you one more time, was a $9 billion bond measure for school facilities, including $2 billion for community college facilities and $7 billion for K-12. Within the K-12 realm, there's $3 billion for new construction, $3 billion for modernization, and $500 million for career technical education facilities. In addition, and the subject obviously of what we're talking about today, there's $500 million in funding reserved for charters that can be used for both new construction or modernization, as Lisa mentioned, of existing facilities. And you can see the excerpt from the law that is included on the slide. Next slide, please. So let's just talk for a second about the politics of Prop 51. This is the first time that we've ever had a school facilities bond placed on the ballot without the approval of the governor or the legislature. And as a background, during the time frame in 2014 and 15 that led up to placing Prop 51 on the ballot, there was a significant amount of negotiations going on behind the scenes, and I'm sure that CCSA was involved in those negotiations on behalf of charter schools, but there were negotiations between the governor's office, the Department of Finance, the legislative branch, especially the Senate Ed and Assembly Education committees, trying to reach an agreement on changes to the school facilities program. And eventually, in late 2015, it became clear to several of the groups that were involved, stakeholder groups involved, that there was not going to be the possibility for reaching an agreement with the legislature. Remember, a school facilities bond, any bond measure like this, general obligation bond backed by the state's general fund, requires a 2/3 vote of the legislature and a signature by the governor. And so the governor was, as indicated in multiple different messages in his budget messages for years previous, had been pushing strongly for changes in the way the school facilities program at the state operated, and he was specifically looking for ways to make the program more equitable, to ensure that funding would go to smaller districts or districts with low income, high minority populations, and he was concerned with the first come, first serve approach of the current program that allows larger districts to get in line, larger districts that can afford consultants, et cetera, to get in line more quickly. I'm aware, and your Michelle and Nicholas can both talk a little bit about this in the end when we speak, of some of the important issues also that the charters brought to the table. The current charter program in the state has been very successful, but it's had its share of problems, and we've had a very high rate of rescissions, and that is essentially charters taking their projects to the state for funding and not being able to perfect because of the complexities of the process and the difficulties of working within the same system that school districts are used to working in, which is it's much more difficult terrain many times for charter schools. So anyway, I digress. The Prop 51 eventually was placed on the ballot by the Coalition for Adequate School Housing, CASH, and the California Building Industry Association, CBIA, also known as, in the parlance of the newspaper, the developers. So the politics behind that one are basically that one of the areas that the governor was insisting upon in negotiations was that he wanted to raise the amount that the developers had to contribute to new construction funding, and the development community could not reach agreement with him on that. My understanding is that the Prop 51 was not supported by the Charter Schools Association and not supported also by some of the major educational associations in California. Typically, in the past, a school facilities bond is, a statewide bond, it has been strongly supported by the teachers' unions, etc., but they were very, very preoccupied with the need for renewal of the higher taxes that were also on the ballot that supported education. And so they basically laid off in their traditional support of the statewide school facilities bond. So anyway, that's just a brief summary of some of the political background of Prop 51 that passed in November with a pretty decent majority, 54–55% majority, and showing once again that school facilities bonds are, especially in a high turnout presidential election like we have had in California, 75% eligible voter turnout, very popular and can pass with a decent majority. Next slide, please. So what's the timing and the implementation of Prop 51? So to be brutally honest, and the short answer, as the slide says, we don't know yet. But what we should be looking for, all of you, is an announcement of a first charter funding round. It's not going to happen before early 2017 and could potentially go further out. And I think as an aside here, we should be aware that there are still funds in OPSC that under the last bond, there are still funds available for the charter school facilities program. There hasn't been a reopening of the round, but there are still about $60 million in funds that OPSC has, $41.3 million in charter funds are still available from the last bond measure, and so at some point those will be rolled into charter funding as we go forward, is what I anticipate. The first real signals that we're going to have about this new bond and what's happening with it will be in the governor's budget, which comes January 10th, the first week in January, or maybe it's the second week, I'm sorry, in 2017. And I would be very aware when it comes out of any interest by the governor in changing the program. And as I mentioned, he's been very clear about wanting to change the program. Look also for signals about staffing up of the agencies that are responsible for the implementation and the management of this program, including the Office of Public School Construction and the California Department of Education. Look also at bond debt service anticipated, and then we can begin to have some signals about the timing of the next program under Prop 51. One of the things to be really clear about is there has been a significant depletion of the ranks within the Office of Public School Construction and somewhat the same at the California Department of Ed. Staff have left and vacancies have not been filled, and so neither of those agencies are at this point adequately staffed up in order to handle a huge influx of new funding and the management of a program. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about regulatory changes to the charter program. I think the most important thing to remember about Prop 51 is because they could not reach any agreement about how to change the program, made the decision to insert the clause that you see at the bottom of this slide. This is from the law that was passed, and it says that the board must apportion the funds for under the law as it read on January 1st, 2015. So this seems to allow no statutory change related to the apportionment of the funds. That said, under the current statute, there is significant room for changes to regulation for any program under a state-administered bond. And in the past, that's happened through the State Allocation Board's Implementation Committee. And whether it does and how that happens now is what we want to be on the lookout in looking for from OPSC, an announcement from the Allocation Board that the Implementation Committee might be setting up and getting ready to meet and looking at developing enabling regulations. Next slide, please. So what are some of the things, and these are the things that I know about from my standpoint as someone who is looking a little bit from the outside in the charter world. I do work with some charters in the Bay Area on projects, but I know, and I'm hoping Michelle and Nick can talk further about some of the charter CCSA's priorities, but these are some things that I know and I've heard in many of the different arenas that I've talked about regulation changes that could meet concerns and issues with the current program. First of all, finding ways to streamline the application process, making it easier to apply, making it simpler to go through the paperwork and the funding process and the vetting that's required. And to be honest with you, this is not just a charter issue. This is a school district issue big time. The state's program, while it works and people know how to navigate it, is very, very complex. And the governor has, in all of his budget messages, been very clear to point out they want to streamline this program too. So there's a lot of interest there. Specific to charters, financial soundness re-reviews. You know, financial soundness and the determination that's made and your submissions that are required that go through the California School Finance Authority, charters are required to go through this process over and over when they can't, when the process is going on. And there's ways that we could make that simpler, working with CSFA, and I think that's an important piece. We could easily make reporting requirements simpler and easier for charters under the program. We could also allow charters, we could change the priority and funding process, which is in place. And what this means is that when districts receive or charters receive an approval from the State Allocation Board for their funds, they have to wait for a priority and funding round when the state sells bonds. And we believe that it's possible, because of the very excellent cash flow position of the state, that we could reinstitute what are called the AB 55 loans, and that funding could be made available immediately for charters that receive their apportionments rather than waiting for priority and funding. In addition, we could look at potential changes to the financial hardship program, which would provide ways that charters could access a greater amount of funding for their projects. So other program changes for charters, good example that would have to wait for statutory changes. Good example is something that Nick mentioned previously. I think one of my understandings is that charters would like to see a requirement for state funding that would tie local district bonds to the requirement that they always include charters within their local bonds. That would have to wait for a statutory change and is not a simple regulatory matter. Next slide, please. So the long and the short of it is we are in a brave new world. We haven't been in this kind of situation where the state program has been extended and it's not supported by the governor or the legislature. So I think you need to really work closely with CCSA because we know that their team in Sacramento will be very involved in implementing the program and in trying to work with the state and with all the players in the legislature and the governor and all the agencies to ensure that the changes that charters need to make this program more successful can become a part of the regulatory changes as we go forward. My contact information is below, and please let me know. Contact me if you have any questions, and we're also going to take questions now too. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Bill. And a question that I got from a few of you was we will be sending out the slides. We'll make these slides available to everybody, as well as a recording of this webinar. They will go out in our weekly member digest and capital update, and we will ensure that all attendees do have all of the materials necessary. So with that, I have already gotten a few questions from everybody, and I'd like to just start off. I'll go through the list. Bill and Lisa and Nick, feel free to jump in if you have the answer. The first question I got is, can we access state bond funds for rehabilitation projects we are currently working on, breaking ground in April?
Assuming that I may be able to assist with that, the regulations do require that the project not be occupied before you receive your funding approval. A reservation of funds, the one that will be, a determination will be made after the application period opens and closes and reviews are done, is the step at which you would need at least to have secured before you can occupy a project. The other issue is that if you're doing a rehabilitation project, you would still need to have the necessary approvals in place. So the project would still have to be approved at state level if in fact you are going to have the opportunity to make the cut for the state bond funds. So it's kind of a challenging position to be in, but one that one would need to rest assured that they have met the requirements that would need to be there so that they don't get disqualified from the program because they move forward too quickly or without the proper approvals.
Yeah,
and
I would.
That,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and for the person asking that question, I would offer an individual case-by-case sort of approach in responding because I don't know the specific circumstances of their project. So yeah, I think that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good answer, Lise. And what I would say also, interestingly enough, this is an area where for school districts doing a renovation, rehabilitation to an existing district building, they would always be going through DSA and doing that process in order to do it. Districts can, in fact, seek reimbursement for a completed modernization project, and many districts do. So maybe that's something that Nick and Michelle look at. Is there? I actually believe that this requirement about occupancy for new construction is in statute, but districts have flexibility under modernization. I know it'd be interesting to see whether that's something that you guys could take up in your look at regulatory change.
And a point to bring up in relation to that question is that charter schools can apply directly. Districts can also apply on behalf of the charter schools. It just brought to mind that one could pursue this either way.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Great, thank you. Next question we have is, can the funds be used to rehab non-district facilities?
That's a challenge and one I want to jump into. Typically, this is probably what could potentially be an exciting opportunity, but really presents a lot of challenges and most of the time does not work. The reason it doesn't is because these facilities must meet the same the same compliance issues that district schools need to meet. And that is by going through DSA, the state architect. They must be in Field Act compliant building. In order to make an existing building Field Act compliant, even if it was recently built, is an enormous challenge, and often, if possible at all, extremely expensive pursuit. In many cases, it doesn't work out at all. Field Act compliance basically has to do with seismic integrity of a building. That's how it started. And schools and hospitals are about the only thing built in California right now that typically meet Field Act standards. So any building that one would attempt to acquire and then rehabilitate, it would have to be brought up to Field Act compliance. And as I said, structurally, that can be quite a challenge.
Great, thank you. Next question. Is this only for new construction? We have been talking a little bit about rehab projects, so no, I do want to clarify that there is an opportunity to use this for rehabilitation, but as Lisa just talked about, it's mostly for rehabilitation of district facilities because of that Field Act compliance. Lisa or Bill, anything to add there?
No, I think you said it right.
I have worked with projects that purchased buildings intending to do this process, and in the end found that they had to demolish the building entirely and start from scratch. Which, if I may, Michelle, with Bill's introduction of his background did remind me that I neglected to do so. And I think that might be important for an understanding as to why CCSA invited me to speak, if I could do so now.
Yes, of course. Of course.
Okay. I have spent the last 21 years up until just under 2 years ago working with both the Office of Public School Construction as a project manager when they began the school facilities program and helped to develop the basic regulations and do outreach. And then I moved to the Department of Education and School Facilities and spent most of the last 14 years working basically with charter schools. All of the state-funded charter schools, as well as many of those that weren't, I approved the sites and the plans for those using state funding throughout the state. Everything from Prop 4755 and 1D that went through the state up until, as I said, just under 2 years ago. The reason I'm no longer doing that is because I left the state so that I could be independent and reach out in a more comprehensive manner to assist charter schools with their facility needs, and not solely, but most of those that were still going through the process with the state bond funds, although I do work with schools in other capacities as well. And you see on my final slide, I do now work as an independent consultant working with charters solely on facilities challenges. Thanks for that opportunity, Michelle.
Of course. Next question that we have is, can you clarify whether LAUSD is part of this process? I think this goes to Nick, part of your presentation on the local bonds.
Sure, thank you, Michelle. So LAUSD has bond funds available. Their most recent bond measure was Measure Q, which passed and included they included a charter school allocation under Measure Q. Those of you, to the person that asked the question, as well as anyone else that's familiar with LAUSD, might know that CCSA is actually involved in a bit of a disagreement with LAUSD about how much money they promised to put aside for charter schools. They initially had promised $450 million, and that number's been reduced over the years. It's essentially been cut in half for a variety of reasons that are kind of the subject of the legal dispute that we have with LAUSD. That's a little bit of the backstory, but there is still money available under what LAUSD calls their bond augmentation grant program. So, for example, they've just recently, in fact, they've approved allocations for 2 different charter projects where they're providing us, roughly maybe half of the funding for the projects through their augmentation grant program, and then those schools are seeking, and actually will be receiving, state bond allocations under the prior Prop 1D. And so there is money available. You know, CCSA has been pushing for years for LUSD to make the money accessible to charters, more accessible to charters with less kind of bureaucratic and other restrictions, and that's an ongoing effort. But there is money available, and you know, schools have recently been able to access it.
Great, thank you. Next question. When you say it bypasses LA City, does that include permitting requirements?
So could you repeat that question? I didn't understand the first portion of it.
Yeah, I believe this was in response to Lisa's presentation. It bypasses LA City, so does that include bypassing permitting requirements in by the city?
I don't know if I can be the best to answer this. My reference to not having local plan approval going through the state to the state architect instead is for just the actual plan approval. Typically, I find in working with these projects that there are still local requirements that, of course, they have to meet.
That's right, and I would just add on to that that I think there's a differentiation between projects on school district property, kind of in conjunction with a school district, you know, working on a charter project, and then projects that are solely on privately owned non-school district property. So school districts have the right to exempt themselves from local zoning regulations and building requirements. Your typical school district project, it does essentially bypass the local folks and is overseen by the various state agencies, including the Division of State Architect. But that zoning exemption power is not something that charter schools have independent access to. So, for example, a school district could exempt a charter school project, but charter schools are not able to do that. It's kind of a long-running issue for charter schools, and there have been lawsuits around it. But I think the current legal advice from folks that advise charter schools charter schools is that they should not try to seek their own zoning exemption.
Okay, next question. Is prevailing wage required for projects receiving bonds?
Oh, yeah.
I think I touched on that just a bit.
Yeah.
One does have to certify to the Office of Public School Construction, to OPSC, that they are complying with that. They do have to register the project with the Department of Industrial Relations and confirm.
Yeah, there's it's an important piece for any kind of state funding, and it goes a little bit to the heart of the complexities of the state program and the same challenges that districts face. When I was was on the staff of the State Allocation Board, we would consistently get district after district that failed to meet the labor compliance requirements in force at the time of their apportionment. And so I think it's really critical, if you're going to play in the state program, make sure that under the current requirements, any contractor that you use is required to be registered with DIR, Department of Industrial Relations, and you're required to register and input your project within 5 days of the award of contract into the DIR website. And so then DIR will process the certified payroll automatically through the upload from the contractor. But it's really critical. These kinds of details can result in the loss of funding. And so an important part of making sure that when you use state funding, you meet all those requirements.
Great, thank you. Next question. If a charter organization that is operating multiple schools with multiple charters wants to build 2 facilities, would that be submitting 2 applications?
On multiple charters, yes. They would most likely, in most cases, they would be submitting more than 1 application.
Yes, 1 for each building, correct?
That's correct.
For each school site, each charter.
Thank you. Yeah. Next question. I have already located the space and building that will need extensive renovation. I have to close the deal or I'll lose opportunity, and I'm in a rural area without many options. Can we make the deal and apply for the grant later?
There are so many, should we say, things on the checklist that you may not be covering in doing so that I would never recommend it. Even if you did secure the deal now, if you find, for example, that you get a reservation of funds and you contact the Department of Education, which is one of the first steps, to have them look at whether your site could be considered approvable, and they find something that is a real red flag, that could break the deal right there, and you would not be able to pursue those funds. You would have to give back the reservation of funds and not be able to access it at all for your project. That's just one example of how this could go awry. I don't know if I need to go any further into that, or if that kind of helps to answer the question as to perhaps why you wouldn't want to secure a site without following at least the intent of the procedures to be sure that if at that point it would be approvable.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Next question, can a charter apply for funding for a site that is located outside of its authorizing district boundaries? So I'm happy to take this.
I believe not. Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, Michelle.
Oh, no, that's okay. There are very limited times when a charter can actually locate their school site outside their district boundaries. There's really only allowed to do that if there is no available facility inside their district, and that's a pretty high level to prove, especially if you're going to be building a facility. So the answer is pretty much almost certainly no on this one.
I concur. I do concur.
Can we give some more details about the match requirements? I believe this is talking about the local match versus getting a loan.
Okay. Do you want to pick that one up, or do you want me to help a bit?
I can go ahead and start and add in. So the local match is 50%. The state match would be 50% of it. There are two options for local match, as Nick talked about earlier. There have been some local bonds. San Diego, LAUSD, some other areas have included charters and local bonds. If you did have that local match from a bond, you would be able to use that for that portion. Otherwise, what's very common is to get a loan from the state, which is a 30-year low-interest loan that goes through CSFA, and that covers the local match portion.
And part of this financial soundness review that is done along the way is in order to assure the state that your finances would allow you to carry that debt service and be able to make that repayment. But that's where most of the schools get their match. Or there can be a combination of such.
And the next question is actually related, and I don't know the answer, so I'm going to see if Lisa or Bill know the answer to this one. What are the interest rates charged on the that local match? And we did just say it's a 30-year loan, but what are the interest rates for that loan?
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't remember what they're charging. There is a it's pretty low, just because interest rates are low. But
Michelle, I saw one recently that was about 3%. I don't know how much that varies. But I'll give you an idea. 3% is one that I saw fairly recently come through.
Yeah, it is based on a federal rate. I forget exactly which one, and they tack on a small increase to that. So it varies, but you're right. It's around that, generally around that. CSFA, I think, on their website discusses more in detail how they approach the rate.
Kyle, I know you asked that question. I will follow up with you and put you in contact with somebody over at CSFA or some more information on it. So next question. We're actually getting a lot of questions, and we have about 9 minutes left. If I don't get to your question, I am writing all of them down, and I will contact you privately, and we can get the question answered by one of our experts or one of our staff members. So the next question is, can the borrower be a nonprofit entity that builds and leases facilities to our CMO schools? So this would be a charter management organization, I believe, and that runs multiple charters. So they would be the ones doing the bond application and borrowing that 30-year lease.
So are we referring to the organization itself, the educational organization itself?
Yes.
Is that my understanding?
Yes.
If I understand then the question correctly, there are, of course, CMOs that have applied for and constructed schools under this.
Yes, that's my understanding as well. Okay, the next question is this program eligible for all types of charter schools, including non-classroom based programs?
They basically have to be seat-based programs, meaning not independent study and such. That's the way the program is set up at this point. And other than that, typically any type of program can be included.
Thank you. Generally speaking, how long is the approval process?
Yeah, we're all chuckling. It's a multiple stage approval process by different entities. So you don't build a school overnight, right, Bill?
That's correct, Lisa. I think that one indication of the length of time that it can take is that charters have, under the statute, don't they have 4 years to convert an application plus one?
Right. Well, what Bill means is from the time that the preliminary apportionment list is approved by the State Allocation Board, the charter then has 4 years to go out, and if they haven't already done so, find a site, have it approved by the Department of Education, develop plans, have them approved by the state architect, and go through all of those processes, and then come back to the OPSC and file for conversion, which means they now have all the approvals and they want to get their money kind of locked. At that point, they can go out to bid and then collect their construction money, pretty much the final step in the process to get going. If they request an additional year, but are showing that they're making substantial progress, they can be approved by the SAB for that. And most of the schools use pretty much that time frame, pretty close to it.
Yes, that's my experience too. And I think just taking it back for a minute to the bigger picture and the political elements of it, a 4 or 5 year timeline to build a new school is something that school districts run up against all the time, and it just seems outrageous. And I think it speaks to some of the reasons why the governor and the legislature have been looking, how can we streamline this? How can we make it easier? And so, yeah, it's not just the charters that take this long with state funds. It's all the districts are in that same boat. And so we're looking at ways that we can streamline the program.
Okay, next question. What are the differences between this measure and Prop 1D?
Well, there's so far, as I said, there is no change to the statute that underlies Prop 1D. Is the same statute. So the Prop 51 bond basically said freeze the law, expend all the funds under this bond in accordance with the law that governs the school facility program in effect on January 1st, 2015. And that's the same law that was a part of Prop 1D, with maybe some minor exceptions going forward that were changes to the law, but very similar.
Can these projects be built on privately owned lots or just LAUSD owned?
They're definitely privately owned. They don't have to be projects on district land. They can be, as I mentioned earlier, on land that is acquired approved by the Department of Education is appropriate for school use, and then the project developed on that land.
For new construction, so I just want to clarify just a little bit here. For new construction, privately owned land is okay. You may run into some zoning challenges, though. For rehabilitation projects, as Lisa explained earlier, that is normally on a district facility because of the Field Act requirement.
Right. And rehabilitation on district facility can also include, there can be new construction on a district facility as well. It can be with a rehabilitation application or separately, just to build new buildings on district-owned land. So it doesn't have to be that you have 15-year-old buildings on a district and you're going to rehabilitate them. You can build brand new buildings on a district site.
Okay, next question. For the per pupil count portion of the grant, are we limited to current charter enrollment numbers, or are we able to project enrollment growth?
You can project. I don't want to take too much time to answer that now because we have so many questions, but it does not need to be on current enrollment. There are ways to calculate how you can apply for pupils other than what you're currently housing.
Okay, great. And Arturo, if you have any more questions, feel free to contact Lisa directly on that one. It was mentioned that funding would not happen until possibly 2017. At what point would applications need to be submitted in order for this funding to happen in 2017?
Well, I think that the start of the program and the initiation or an opening of a charter round is really the beginning of the longer process that both Lisa and I were talking about. So the funding itself follows a charter making a successful application and then converting with a set of DSA-approved plans for their project. So I think the funding itself would take a significant amount of time to appear after the initiation of a new charter funding round. Lisa, you agree?
Yeah. Typically, as I mentioned, the application period is open for about 3 months. Once it closes and they start dropping the pegs in the holes, OPSC also forwards all of the financial documents submitted to CSFA for their review of each of those applicants. This takes another period of a few months. By the time it concludes, we're often back to the point of now going to state allocation board. Maybe historically it's been like 5 to 6 months after the application period closes to accomplish all of it. So even to know if a school has a reservation of funds could theoretically take, from the time the application period first opens, probably 8-9 months.
Great, thank you. So it is 1:59. I know there were some questions we didn't get to. Like I said, I will reach out to all of you individually and we will put you in contact with somebody to get the answer. You also will get the materials which have both Lisa and Bill's emails on them. And my email for everybody, if you'd like to reach out to me, is mlow@ccsa.org. I'm happy to answer any other questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you so much to Lisa and Bill for taking the time to share all of your knowledge with our charters. And we know that everyone is very excited about the possibility of this state bond money. We will definitely be following up with more information and look forward to some sessions at our conference about this and potentially some more webinars and other education opportunities around this program. So thank you again to everybody for joining us and have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
You're welcome.